Welcome back to the Daily Crypto Deep Dive. Today we're doing a proper deep dive on something that gets mentioned in headlines all the time, but usually gets explained badly. Ripple's XRP Escrow. You'll constantly hear 1 billion XRP unlocked, and then people either panic like it's a dump, or they shrug like it means nothing. The truth is it's somewhere in the middle, and once you understand how it actually works, you can read these stories with a lot more clarity. So this episode is going to answer the key questions in plain English. Why did Ripple create escrow in the first place? When did it start? How does the unlock then relock process actually work on the ledger? Why do people watch it every month? Does it automatically mean selling pressure? And what's the bigger picture? What Ripple claims it's trying to achieve versus what critics worry about? Let's start right at the beginning, because the origin story matters. Back in 2017, Ripple held a very large amount of XRP. That created an ongoing market concern. Even if Ripple had good intentions, the market didn't like the idea that a single company had that much control over potential supply. So Ripple announced it would place 55 billion XRP into escrow on the XRP ledger to increase predictability and provide certainty around how much could come to market. The structure they described was very specific. 55 separate escrow contracts, each with 1 billion XRP, set to expire on a schedule, with releases happening on the first day of each month for a series of months. The key phrase here is upper limit. The escrow was designed so the market could say, right, even in the most extreme scenario, only up to this amount can become available in a given month. Then, in late 2017, the XRP ledger documentation published a plain-language explanation of this escrow plan. It said the escrow system would release a total of 1 billion XRP each month across those escrows. And crucially, it emphasized that the amount actually entering circulation would likely be less, because Ripple expected to put unused XRP back into a new escrow. So, that's the intent on paper, an upper cap on monthly availability, plus a mechanism that can push unused supply out into the future. Now, when did this actually start in practice? The escrow era is generally talked about as a 2017 implementation, with the scheduled monthly release pattern beginning right after that setup period. You'll see many sources describe it as a system introduced in 2017, and then operating with monthly releases thereafter. Now, let's explain what everyone gets confused about, the unlock and relock loop. Here's the simplest way to understand it. On the first of the month, an escrow expires. That makes up to 1 billion XRP available for Ripple's use. But available does not automatically mean sold. It means it can be used for operations, for ecosystem growth, for liquidity programs, or for sales. And the remainder can be placed into escrow again. Ripple's own explanation is clear. The escrow provides a predictable maximum, and any extra XRP left over in a month would be placed into a new escrow, so it releases in a later month, where no other escrow is currently scheduled to release. That's how they create a rolling queue. So in plain terms, it's like this. They unlock a chunk, they use some portion, then they relock what they don't use, pushing it further into the future. And there's an important psychological point here. A lot of people hear 1 billion unlock, and assume 1 billion hits exchanges. That's not how it works. The unlock is a ceiling on availability, not a guarantee of immediate selling. Now, why would Ripple do it this way? Ripple's stated rationale is supply predictability and market confidence, basically telling the market, you don't need to worry about surprise floods. But there's also a practical business reason. Ripple needs XRP liquidity for its ecosystem, and for programs that support market functioning, like incentives to market makers to tighten spreads and provide liquidity. Ripple explicitly talked about using XRP for incentives and liquidity-related purposes when describing the escrow plan. So escrow is partly a trust mechanism and partly a treasury management mechanism. Now, why do people still argue about it? Because even with predictability, the market still has to price supply dynamics. If a big pool of tokens is controlled by an entity that can sell or distribute them, investors will debate whether that creates ongoing downward pressure, or whether it provides healthy liquidity and supports adoption. That's the core tension: liquidity versus perceived dilution. Supporters frame it like this: They say escrow makes XRP more investable because it turns an unknown risk into a known schedule. And they argue that a functioning payments and liquidity ecosystem needs inventory and market-making support. From that point of view, a controlled release mechanism is not a dump. It's part of how the ecosystem runs. Now, critics frame it differently, and we will get to that after a short break. Don't go anywhere. They say that even predictable selling is still selling, and that the existence of a large controlled supply can weigh on long-term price discovery. Some also argue it gives Ripple too much influence over the supply narrative, even if it's on-ledger and transparent. And then you've got the analytical middle ground, which I think is where most serious listeners should land. Escrow is neither a magical stabilizer nor a guaranteed price suppressor. It's a structure. It changes risk perception. It changes how traders position around known dates. And it creates recurring monthly moments where people look for on-chain movements and interpret them through their bias. Now let's address the "how do they lock them back up" part in a way that's actually understandable. When Ripple relocks, it's not a vague promise. It's using ledger functionality to place the unused portion into new escrow contracts again. The XRP ledger explanation describes that any additional XRP left over each month is placed into a new escrow, so it releases in the first month where no escrow is currently releasing. So the relock mechanism is basically move unused XRP into future-dated escrow contracts, adding it to the back of the queue. Now, there's also been deeper research into how the escrow queue behaves in practice. For example, Coinmetrics published an on-chain analysis that raised questions about how escrow behavior compared with what was publicly reported at the time, including discrepancies and implementation details around the escrow queue. That matters because it shows why serious analysts look at the ledger, not just headlines. That doesn't mean anything sinister by itself, but it does highlight a key point. For credibility, the best approach is always to treat on-chain and official documentation as primary signals, and treat social media narratives as secondary. Now, what about price action when this started? The honest answer is that it's very difficult to isolate the effect of escrow itself, because late 2017 and early 2018 were also a period of huge market-wide volatility across the entire crypto space. Escrow was introduced in 2017, but XRP's major moves around that period were happening alongside a broader cycle where everything was moving aggressively. So if someone tells you, escrow caused price to do X, you should be cautious. The market environment was too noisy to claim a clean cause and effect. What you can say credibly is this: escrow introduced a predictable supply schedule, and over time, the market learned to treat monthly unlocks more like routine events than shocking surprises. Unless something unusual happens, like a large transfer that appears to head toward an exchange, or triggers speculation. That's where modern price reaction tends to come from. Not the scheduled unlock itself, but what the market thinks Ripple does with the unlocked portion, and what the broader market mood is at that time. Now here's the bigger picture question. Why do this rather than just selling as needed? Because in crypto, trust is price. And in a world where market participants were worried about supply overhang, escrow is a signal of constraint. It's Ripple saying, we are limiting ourselves to a transparent schedule. That can matter for institutional perception, it can matter for market makers, and it can matter for general sentiment, even if it doesn't create immediate price pumps. Also, for Ripple as a business, escrow provides a way to manage treasury and operations while still keeping the market informed. That's important because Ripple has historically used XRP in various ways, connected to its ecosystem and liquidity operations. So the overall picture is this: escrow exists to reduce uncertainty, set expectations, and allow controlled usage of XRP for ecosystem needs, while addressing concerns about sudden supply shocks. And the trade-off is that the market will always debate whether controlled supply is still an overhang, and that debate never fully goes away because it's structural. When you see 1 billion XRP unlocked, the next sentence should never be, "That's a dump." The correct next sentence is, "That's the scheduled maximum release, and the key question is how much is actually used versus relocked." Then you can add, "The market tends to watch wallets and transfers rather than the unlock date itself, because the unlock date is known." And if you want to sound very credible, you can add, The original escrow plan explicitly described a system where unused XRP would be placed back into escrow to release later, so the headline number is an upper bound, not the net new supply entering circulation. That's a clean, accurate way to frame it. Now let's finish with what this means for 2026 and why it matters as a theme. If crypto is moving toward more structured institutional participation, then transparency and predictable supply mechanics matter more than they did in the early retail-only era. Products, market structure, compliance, those are the themes that make institutions comfortable. And escrow, whatever your opinion of it, was an early attempt to address market structure concerns around supply predictability. So the right way to summarize escrow is not to call it good or bad. It's to say it's a supply management system designed to cap monthly availability and reduce uncertainty, while still giving Ripple flexibility to support ecosystem liquidity and operations. And for listeners, the practical takeaway is, monthly unlock headlines matter less than what the on-chain movements suggest is happening next. And that is where we will leave it for today. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Make sure you are following the show, and as always, we will see you at the top.